I'm going to explain why we don't have freedom of expression in the United Kingdom or in America, although we do to a much stronger degree in America. But in Britain, we categorically don't have it. It's commonly said that freedom of expression or freedom of speech, which is a part of a fundamental part of our human rights, it is commonly said that it is conditional, and that under some circumstances the right can be violated, and that we don't actually have a right to freedom of expression. And ultimately, we permit laws to exist in England and Wales that totally and utterly nullify the principle of freedom of expression, which is that you can say something without fear of penalty. Now, what the total crackpot idiot lawyers and right-wing nutters and even some on the left and socialists say is that freedom of expression does not mean freedom of the consequences of that expression or of that speech. Now, that is utterly ridiculous. Of course it does mean that. Now, the way that the law is worded is that they are correct, that we permit restrictions on freedom of speech, basically. And one principal restriction is the ability to be sued. So the ability to be sued for defamation or libel means that millions of people are silenced all the time because they would be scared of being sued by a company or by another person, like a rich person or a wealthy whatever, or a politician or a celebrity, or someone that they want to criticise but they can't say what they really believe. And this occurs even in products, even in companies. So there is a grotesque, this permitting libel and slander to exist means that we cannot have freedom of expression in this country. If you was to criticise a bank, the vast majority of them would not generally take legal action, but some would, and we know that. There's a very prominent Jewish celebrity, if you will, that was on Countdown, who she likes to sue people for criticising some of her opinions on Twitter. Now, I believe that I straight up believe that slander and libel should be completely illegal, in terms of they should be wiped off the statute books. You should have absolutely no ability to enforce libel or slander laws. They are an absolute disgrace. You should have no right to your character, essentially. You should have no monopoly on that information. If someone wants to say that you're a horrible person, you're a Machiavellian, you're a cheating, lying scumbag, then they should be free to say that, and they should be free to print that. If that's what they really believe, they should be free to do that. Now, I'm not saying that every single libel and defamation case would win, but where you criticise someone or a product and where they threaten to sue you, the problem is that the costs of the legal system in England and Wales are so much and so high that the vast majority of people would probably not bother fighting it, and would either ignore it or would just apologise with like a cease and desist letter. They would just say, right, okay, I'm sorry. They would delete the print, delete the post, and then apologise. Like, people have been sued off TripAdvisor reviews. Now, all this, even if what you said was false, if you really believed it to be true, you should have absolutely no, the claimant should have absolutely no legal ability to restrict what you've said at all and sue you for damages. They should have absolutely none. Even if you said something like, I believe he's a paedophile. Now, I agree that speech can ruin reputations, but I don't accept that you should have any right to a reputation. I don't accept that. So if someone said something about me, I would not sue them. Now, even if it was completely false. I wouldn't do it because it is fundamentally wrong to use a totally capitalist, restrictive, inhumane legal apparatus to cancel someone else's opinion. Now, do I believe there should be some so the fact we have and by the way, slander and libel laws are only used by rich people, and in fact, rich people and corporations. So when McDonald's sued that people those in the Muck libel case in the 1990s, which Keir Starmer was involved in, which went on for years and years. Basically, to cut a long story short, someone put a pamphlet out that wrote a pamphlet, well, printed one, in London, I believe, handed them out, that criticised McDonald's policies and the food that they produce, which they said was basically killing the planet and also killing you. And I believe that is a political expression, and if they really believed it, they should be able to write it. And by the way, I believe that is true, that McDonald's food, it is a fact, McDonald's food, the high-fat, high-cholesterol, meat-based food, not the salad that you can now buy, typical McDonald's food, fast food, is totally carcinogenic. It gives you cancer. It's totally atherogenic. It causes heart disease. The oil causes red blood cell clumping, which causes cholesterol to build up in the arteries, which causes heart disease, causes strokes, causes vision loss, causes sexual impotency. So that's a fact. That is a fact. And you shouldn't be eating McDonald's on a regular basis. Maximum once every few months if you were going to do that. But that will be true not just for McDonald's, but any fast food, KFC. It's all totally unhealthy for humans because it's all animal based and fat based, which is totally unhealthy. But they handed this pamphlet out and they were sued initially successfully, basically, and it went to the European Court, and I believe in the end, they won in some areas, but I mean McDonald's in the end said that they're not going to make them pay. They're going to use it as like a test case, and they wouldn't actually make them pay the fine that they would get, well, the damages that they would get. So anyway, cut a long story short, it should never have got to court because our legal system should not permit, in any circumstances, especially for a company, it should never permit someone to be sued for giving an opinion on the products or service of a company under any circumstances, even if what the individual says is completely false. You should have absolutely, no company should have absolutely any legal right to take down a review, to stop someone distributing information about the company, a review of the product or a review of the service. They should have no right to that. You should have no right to a reputation, but definitely not a corporal entity like a company, a legal fiction. They definitely shouldn't have any right to it. And I also believe that normal citizens should have no right to a reputation, because if you think about it, the only people that would ever use that are capitalist nutters, people with loads of money, people that have exploited the means of production and have become super wealthy. They are companies. They are the only types of people and companies on the planet that would use these laws to silence a critic. That's how they are used in reality. They're used to stop it to stop criticism, to stop legitimate criticism. I would say only in a minority of cases is what the individual said completely false. But even when they said it was, when it is completely false, the claim that they've made, and they've damaged the reputation, quantifying damage to the reputation is super difficult. And again, most people would never ever dream of suing someone for slander or libel. In normal life, you would never do that, even if it was about your company. Most people would not do that. the cost of going to court would be so expensive. But even if it was free, I mean, don't get me wrong, if it was free, maybe more people would do it. But I still would not, and I think that this is basically a capitalist paradise for them, for the people that want the status quo, from the elite that want this system, because it means that criticism of capitalism, criticism of companies and their policies, criticism of an animal-based diet is censored. Basically, criticism is censored all the time because people are scared of being sued. So that's a major reason. The fact we permit these laws to exist, slander and libel, that is a major stumbling block to freedom of expression. The other thing is things like NDAs. We permit people to sign non-disclosure agreements. I think the vast majority of non-disclosure agreements should be completely illegal. I think that, you know, if you got information about a company and you give it away to another company, or you know, there's many different things that the NDAs are, again, these gagging clauses are a disgusting capitalist tool in the vast majority of cases. I would say that we should live in a society of information where free information is passed amongst us, not hidden away, so we can't criticise and we can't move on and we can't gain understanding from things. But companies in Britain and in America, like the big banks, the big energy companies, you know, big manufacturers and so forth, and the media and celebrities and many other people, they do not want the changes to the status quo. They want to protect their interests, which they see as maintaining capitalism, because for them, being multimillionaires, it works for them. And you know, so I heard someone said the other day that you know, we've British people have never had it so good, and that is fantasy land. Don't get me wrong, we have technological change like smartphones, the internet and so forth, faster cars, electric cars, but the structures of capitalism are not significantly changing. They're not. In the past 100 years, I mean, there's a managerial class now that has come about, definitely. There are people that don't own the means of production, but are people that, you know, middle managers and so forth, that they wouldn't have been anywhere near as many of them 100 years ago. So they're a new class of people that basically, they're not proletariat, but they're not owners of the means of production. They're not shareholders and they're not technically bosses, but they have access to information in the workplace that the people at the bottom do not, and they act like little attack dogs from the bosses, and they enforce what the bosses want ultimately. But there's definitely a massive class of coordinators and a class of managerial class that didn't exist prior to 100 years ago. But fundamentally, capitalism is still, most people are still pathetic wage slaves, and we don't have workplace democracy, and I'm not going to talk about that all now. But so fundamentally, our freedom of expression laws are an absolute disgrace. Now, freedom of expression should not be absolute. I agree with that. So you shouldn't be able to go down the street, walk up to someone and say, "Hey, N-word, you're an effing mother," whatever, and racially abuse someone in the street. And you shouldn't be able to continuously harass someone to the face or continually harass someone online. That should be, if the individuals ask you to stop and you've continued to harass them, and if they blocked you and you continue to communicate when they've said stop, that should be illegal. That is, and furthermore, if you was involved in a crime like a robbery, or you was going to rob a bank, or you were going to rob something, and as part of that crime, all you did was say, "Right, shoot him," then you shouldn't be able to say, "Oh, I wasn't." We have freedom of expression, we have freedom of speech, so I can't be done because all I did was tell him to shoot you. That's ridiculous. Of course, when it's involved in a crime, a direct action like that, the freedom of speech should be restricted. You shouldn't be free to do that as part of a crime. So there are instances like harassment, like part of a crime, where freedom of speech would be restricted and you wouldn't be able to do. But libel and slander, you know, discussing companies and products online, giving opinions on other people like celebrities or people down the road, saying, oh, I believe he's an X, I believe he's a this, that, you would be free to that, because no one would have any right to a reputation. No one would have, no company would, and no person would. And NDAs and where non-disclosure agreements are allowed to exist, they would also be massively restricted. So the vast majority of them would not be permitted to exist. That's another way that we can improve freedom of speech. But the main one is that preventing anyone from being sued. I mean, other people have put proposals that the maximum should be £1,000 or should be £10,000. I don't agree. I just think you should have no legal right to a reputation, and that you should be free to criticise and speak what you want, essentially, other than harassment and the other thing I mentioned. And every other part should be free to do that. And so that means that all restrictions on speech in an employment contract would also be made null and void, would also be made illegal. I think it should be illegal to say to staff, you can't say X, X and X about this company after you've gone. I think that's total BS. I think any company that says, we have a social media policy where you have to act appropriately. Again, all that is just basically stopping them from criticism. Some of it is because they don't want a bad reputation, because they don't want to have employed nutters, to employ people that seem to be controversial and so forth, that might hurt the sales. I understand why they want to do it, but I don't believe that the company's right to generate profit and have a reputation is more important. I don't agree it's more important than an individual's right to speak freely about what he believes, including criticism of policies in government, criticism of anything. So, no, that's not a legitimate thing that they've said, and they should be illegal, basically, not just unenforceable, not just banned, illegal. So companies that write these into contracts should be fined massive amounts of money. That's what should happen. This is not what the law is. This is what should be the law. So, because right now we have mass censorship. We have mass censorship because of the threat of suing, the NDAs, the restrictions in employment contracts. We have grotesque censorship to a degree that you wouldn't believe. We make China look like, honestly, China is not a communist country. I'm not ever going to say it's a communist. That's ridiculous. It's a ruling cabal, top-down, state capitalist country. That's what it is. It's not a worker paradise. That's ridiculous. There's a billion wage slaves in China. That calling that socialism or communism would make Karl Marx turn over in his grave. He would laugh at you all day long. That's insane to say that. But they look stupid because they ban things like Facebook or YouTube and whatever else they try and ban, even though you can get around it very easily. But they look stupid because people say, well, you know, it's kind of like old-fashioned communism where these authoritarian governments, like in Russia, they try and censor the citizenship, and it just fails spectacularly. And they look stupid. But in Britain, we have a similar thing. So you can go on Facebook, you can go on YouTube, you can go and do what you want, but there's always the threat that in some circumstances you can be sued or suppressed or lose your job because you gave an opinion online. You know, I couldn't believe this, but a council worker in Wigan, a librarian who'd worked for years, I believe like 20 years, something like that. I'll post a link down below. The Wigan Council had selected, and in fact I'm going to do a separate video on this because it's so important. Wigan Council had selected a Chinese contractor to carry out a massive project, probably because the Chinese contractor, which is owned by the Chinese state government, probably because the Chinese contractor agreed to pay up front investment, millions and millions of pounds, into Wigan. But they chose that contractor out of many other contractors, many of whom are English, many British, and people are criticising it on many different levels. First of all, why are we giving money to the communist state of China? Because that's where the money will ultimately end up in some capacity through taxes and so forth, and it's ultimately owned partially by the Chinese government. Why are we giving money to human rights abusive Chinese company that traps Uyghurs, these ethnic Uyghurs that are they're a Muslim population that don't look like the Han Chinese, that are treated like a piece of crap by the Chinese government. That's as far as I can see, that is a fact. And so people are saying they have massive human rights abuses. Why should we give money to China when and furthermore, why should we not give money to British companies that live here and employ British citizens? That's not to say that Beijing Construction wouldn't have employed British quantity surveyors and so forth, and site engineers and labourers and whatever, but ultimately more profits are going out of the United Kingdom than would have been had we selected an English company to do it. So I think that the criticism is totally legitimate, and that's ultimately what this lady, this librarian, has said. And unbelievably, because of the librarian's contract had a disrepute clause, which basically says that you must not bring the council into disrepute on social media or whatever it was. You must, and disrepute just means give it a bad reputation. She has been sacked. She was suspended, and then she's been sacked. Now, that is the most disgusting, ridiculous thing I have ever heard. Number one, she wasn't employed by a private company. She was employed by a council. It's not a private company. It's a state government. Secondly, the council is basically gagging, silencing staff from criticising their own council, and not their employer. She's ultimately criticising her council, where she lives. Now, she should have a universal right to criticise anything, including any person and any company. She should be free, and including any government company, like a council. But because of our disgusting laws in Britain, we do not have freedom of speech. And because of that disrepute clause, she's been sacked. Now, there should be a revolution in Wigan because of this. That's how serious it is. That is how utterly, absolutely mad we have become as a society, that we would tolerate the most disgusting censorship on this planet. Never, ever, ever let anyone tell you that we have freedom of speech in Britain, because we do not have freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is a total lie that's told to you by the capitalist class to make you think that the pathetic breadcrumbs that you have right now is freedom of speech. It is not. It is mass censorship. We have mass censorship. China has mass censorship, but we have it also. And that is a disgrace. And millions of people that work for private companies, not millions, but, well, many people have lost their jobs working for private companies who have criticised, said things that are controversial, political speech online, and have been sacked, or have, but fundamentally, millions of speech does not exist, or does not publicly exist, because of the fear of losing the job or being sued. That is why all this needs to be wiped off the statute books. Give people the absolute freedom of expression, because this is a total disgrace. And I'm glad to have educated a lot of you totally infantile lawyers who think and keep repeating the totally batshit crazy, nutty position that freedom of speech does not mean freedom from the consequences of speech. Because in principle, yes, it does mean that. To lose your job is a penalty. To be sued thousands of pounds is a penalty and means you are not free as long as those restraints exist. You stupid fools. Thank you for listening.